I used to believe love was blind, until I found myself clinging to the wreckage of a marriage built on lies. The first real crack in the illusion came late one night as I was folding laundry in the quiet hum of our bedroom. My husband Jeremy was in the shower and his phone, usually glued to him like a second skin, buzzed beside the bed. I wasn't the type to snoop, but that night something in me just knew. Maybe it was the way he'd been pulling away lately. Or the way he jumped whenever I asked him about his late meetings. The screen lit up again. This time I saw the message preview. "Can't wait to be in your arms again, hubby, red heart." And beneath it the sender's name, Tasha. My heart dropped. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from beneath me. I knew that name. Jeremy had once mentioned her in passing, calling her an old friend from college. That was years ago, before the wedding, before the vows, before the inheritance clause in my late father's will that granted Jeremy access to millions upon my marriage. I hadn't thought about that clause in ages. It always seemed like a mere technicality. But suddenly it felt like a loaded gun pointed at my trust. Hands trembling, I opened the phone. It was unlocked. A cruel twist of fate. Or maybe the universe knew I deserved the truth. What I saw inside shattered me. Thread after thread of texts between Jeremy and Tasha. Photos. Videos. Their entire relationship documented in secret. He called her his real wife. He referred to our marriage as a business arrangement. He said he just needed to keep up appearances a little longer, and once the final transfer from my trust fund was completed, they'd be set for life. I dropped the phone like it burned me. In that moment, everything real in my life felt fake. Our wedding, our honeymoon, the night we spent talking about baby names, the promises he whispered when he thought I was asleep. Every kiss, every "I love you," reduced to a manipulation in a bigger game. I sat frozen on the edge of the bed while the shower ran on. I stared into space, my chest tight with betrayal, shame, and rage. I thought about my father, about the fortune he left behind and the stipulation he added because he thought Jeremy was a good man, who deserved to build something alongside me. But Jeremy wasn't building with me. He was playing me. The worst part. He was good at it. So charming, so attentive, at least in the beginning. He knew all the right things to say. He studied me like a test he had to pass, and I gave him an A+ every single time. I mistook his rehearsed affection for real love. I let down every wall I'd carefully built because I thought I'd finally found someone who loved me. Not the money, not the legacy, just me. But that was the lie. The truth was staring at me from the glowing screen he left behind like a ticking bomb. The bathroom door creaked open and he stepped out, towel around his waist, hair wet and messy. He smiled at me, smiled. And I smiled back. Because in that instant I knew one thing for certain. I was going to destroy him. He wanted a performance? I'd give him the show of his life. Let him think I was still the clueless, obedient wife. Let him believe I never touched his phone. I'd play the game because now I knew the rules. And I never lost a game when I knew the rules. He came over to kiss my cheek and I didn't flinch. "I love you," he murmured. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and whispered, "I love you too." Let the bastard believe it. Because the next move was mine. I woke up the next morning with a new identity. One I hadn't worn before. Not the loyal wife, not the sweet daughter. No. I became the observer. The quiet storm. The woman who knew everything but said nothing. Jeremy, on the other hand, moved through our morning routine like nothing had changed. He kissed me goodbye, asked me what I wanted for dinner like a doting husband, and left for work. But now I knew exactly where he was going. He wasn't headed to any office downtown. He was likely headed to Tasha, his real wife as he so proudly called her in those messages. The same woman he was emotionally cheating with while stealing from me brick by brick. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw his things out the window like the women in those late-night dramas. I just smiled and started collecting. That day I pulled out an old journal I hadn't touched since college. But instead of poetry or love letters, I filled its pages with notes. Every lie, every shady meeting, every late night he came home smelling like cologne I didn't wear. I logged every detail. I cross-checked credit card charges with his alibis. I combed through bank statements and suddenly saw all the signs that I had missed before. Transfers to unknown accounts, luxury gifts that never showed up at home, dinners I never attended but still paid for. It was all there, buried in plain sight. I had just been too in love to look. But the inheritance clause? That was the real key. When my father died, his will had been very clear. If I married, my husband would automatically become co-owner of certain assets, properties, business shares, and a sizable portion of a trust fund that I couldn't touch alone. It was his way of making sure I never had to shoulder life alone, he said. A romantic idea. Naive really. Jeremy knew exactly what he was doing when he pursued me. He timed everything. The proposal, the wedding, the charm offensive with my family. And I fell for it all. He didn't marry me for love. He married me for what I could give him. He wanted access, security, power. And for the past 2 years he'd been siphoning little pieces of that inheritance, all while keeping up the mask of a loving husband. The man was nothing if not methodical. But here's what he didn't count on: my resilience. He thought I was weak, soft, naive, just another privileged girl playing house. But I was raised by a man who built an empire from nothing. I knew how to spot patterns, how to calculate risk, how to dismantle empires brick by brick. I had that in my blood. I hired a private investigator. Quietly, discreetly. A woman named Adrienne, recommended by a friend who had gone through her own high society betrayal. Adrienne was brilliant, calm, professional, and ruthless in the way only someone betrayed could be. Within days she had photos, hotel meetings, car pickups, even a shared apartment in a part of town I never visited. Tasha wasn't just some fling, she was part of the plan. The two of them were running a long con and I was the mark. What they didn't realize was that I was also a strategist. One who had learned from the best. Instead of confronting Jeremy, I doubled down on the act. I cooked more. I laughed louder. I left love notes in his bag. I let him believe I was falling even deeper in love. He thought he was winning. And while he was busy celebrating his victory, I was getting all my ducks in a row. I updated my will. Quietly transferred what assets I could to a secondary trust in my mother's maiden name, one that Jeremy couldn't touch. I contacted our lawyer under the guise of estate planning, but every document I signed quietly began severing the financial ties that made him rich. Every night I'd lie beside him and count down the days. I watched him sleep, snore, smile in his dreams. I knew exactly who he was dreaming of. And yet I didn't cry. I was too focused on the bigger picture. On justice. On revenge. Because while Jeremy thought he had married a naive heiress, what he actually married was his worst nightmare in disguise. And when it all came crashing down, I wasn't going to just leave him. I was going to ruin him. It's a strange thing, pretending to love someone you've come to loathe. Every morning I would kiss Jeremy goodbye with the same lips I used to whisper love into. Every evening I welcomed him home like nothing in the world was wrong. In his eyes I was still his fool. But in mine he was already a ghost. I was just deciding how loud to make his fall. He didn't notice the subtle changes. The way I'd leave my phone recording on the kitchen island while I made dinner, pretending to hum along to music. Or how I asked curious little questions about his work meetings, planting the idea that I still bought the charade. He underestimated how much truth a man will give away when he thinks no one's listening. Meanwhile, Adrienne was feeding me everything I needed. She'd found not only the apartment Tasha and Jeremy shared but also a paper trail connecting them to an offshore account in the Caymans. Money had been siphoned there. Money from the trust fund I hadn't even touched yet. He'd used forged documents. Faked signatures. He didn't just betray my heart. He broke federal law. Sickened me. But I stayed still. Because I knew that people like Jeremy destroy themselves best when you give them enough rope. I made an appointment with my father's old financial advisor. Pretended it was about learning how to be more independent. In reality, I was transferring everything with my name on it into a secured LLC. Jeremy had no idea the house was now protected. That the cars, the investments, everything he thought would be his in the divorce, was no longer reachable. He thought he could gut me and walk away with my father's empire. But that empire knew how to defend itself. And I was now its sword. A week later I found my moment. Jeremy was running late. Work emergency, he said. But I knew better. So I waited in our bedroom, calm and silent, with his laptop on my lap. I'd cloned his phone weeks ago. Every text he sent, every photo he saved, I had access to in real time. But now I wanted the files hidden deep, the ones he never thought I'd find. It was all there. Spreadsheets titled Plan A, Tasha Joint Assets, and even one called Exit Strategy. That one nearly made me laugh. In it, he had outlined a full breakdown of how he'd divorce me, claim emotional abandonment, and walk away with spousal support. He even noted how keeping her sweet till Q4 would give him leverage for the final push. It was like watching a wolf dress itself in sheep's clothing. He walked in, sweaty and breathless, kissing me on the forehead like nothing had happened. I acted giddy. "I missed you," I chirped, knowing exactly where he'd been an hour ago. He smiled. "Work's been crazy." I played along. "You should take a weekend off. Maybe we could go somewhere. Napa." He hesitated, probably worried about leaving Tasha unattended. "Maybe," he replied. In my head I smiled. Because I wasn't planning a getaway. I was planning his public execution. The final phase of my plan was risky, but necessary. I hosted a dinner party the following Friday. Just a few friends, a few glasses of wine, and a subtle setup that he never saw coming. Adrian wired the house. Cameras in innocuous places. Microphones in the floral centerpieces. Everything recorded, everything logged. And I handed Jeremy an envelope halfway through dessert. He looked confused. "What's this?" I just smiled. "Open it." Inside was a neatly printed copy of the bank transfers. The fake documents. The photos of him and Tasha time-stamped. Their lease agreement. A copy of the messages where he called her, my real wife. He paled. The room went quiet. I let the silence speak. What is this, Claire?" he finally choked out. My voice was calm. "This is your final chapter, Jeremy." I excused the guests quickly after that, told them it was a private matter, thanked them for coming. Once the door shut behind the last guest, I turned to him fully. "You married me for my money. You planned to ruin me. But what you didn't realize is that I was never your prey. You were mine." He tried to protest, stumble through apologies. But I wasn't interested in his words anymore. I handed him the pre-drafted divorce papers. "Sign these. Walk away quietly. Or I press charges. Your choice." His jaw dropped. "You wouldn't." "Oh, I would," I said, voice like steel. "And I already have everything I need." The house was mine. The fortune was secured. And his affair. About to become public record. But this wasn't the end. Not yet. Because I still hadn't told Tasha. And believe me, she deserved to know exactly who the man she loved really was. I used to believe closure came quietly, through healing, forgiveness, distance. But some betrayals don't deserve silence. Some wounds demand to scream. The night after the dinner party, Jeremy left our home with a suitcase, stammering something about needing time to think. I let him go. I watched from the window as his car disappeared down the street and into whatever lie he'd planned next. I didn't stop him. I didn't need to. Because I had already scheduled the final show. You see, while Jeremy thought I'd let him slither away into the shadows with his mistress and whatever crumbs he could steal, I was preparing a stage. One where everyone would see him for who he really was. A liar. A fraud. A parasite. The opportunity came 2 weeks later. It was the annual Armitage Foundation Gala, an exclusive black tie event hosted in honor of my late father. Jeremy had attended the last 2 years proudly at my side, shaking hands with the very board members who now suspected nothing about the scandal brewing beneath our designer-clad marriage. This year I went alone. I wore black velvet, lips blood red, and a diamond necklace Jeremy once gifted me, paid for I now knew with a transfer from my trust fund. Everyone greeted me warmly. I smiled. I floated. I played the grieving daughter, the polished heiress, the picture of elegance. And then at precisely 8:45 p.m. the music dimmed. The screens around the ballroom flickered to life. At first it looked like a tribute reel, clips of my father's old speeches, charity work. But then the video cut. Suddenly, Jeremy's face filled the screen. It was footage Adrian had compiled, grainy clips of him kissing Tasha in the apartment, laughing with her at the beach, holding her pregnant belly. Then came the spreadsheets. The timelines. A screen recording of the messages where he called Tasha his real wife, and referred to our marriage as the waiting room. Gasps erupted across the room. But I wasn't done. The footage cut again, to a quiet interview Adrian had filmed with me, seated in my father's old office. "I trusted him," I said in the video. "He married me for money, not love. He wanted my inheritance. He planned to leave me the moment he got his share. This is who Jeremy truly is." The screen went black. Silence. Then murmurs. Then chaos. I stood there, calm, unflinching. Because the best part hadn't even arrived yet. Tasha was in the crowd. Yes, she had been invited too. Under the guise of a private donor invite. Adrian had tracked her down and offered her the ticket weeks ago, just to make sure she'd be there. She didn't know who I was. Not yet. She rushed toward me when the lights came back on, mascara smudged and face pale. You lied to me," she shouted. "You said you didn't know who I was." I looked her in the eye. "And you said you were married to my husband. People were filming now. I didn't care." She sobbed. "I didn't know. I swear. He told me you were his sister's friend. He said the marriage was fake. He said it was for the money." I nodded slowly. Well, at least he didn't lie about that part. She stood there, frozen in shame, the room closing in around her. "And Jeremy?" He stormed in 5 minutes later. Someone must have called him. He looked wild-eyed, sweating, breathless. He saw me. Then the screen. Then the silent, judging crowd. He didn't say a word. I met his eyes, steady, unbothered. And then I turned away, walked through the crowd and stepped into the night air. It was finally over. The aftermath unfolded quickly. The board launched an internal investigation. Jeremy was removed from every financial position he held with my family's businesses. The offshore accounts were flagged. Legal proceedings began immediately. Fraud, misappropriation of funds, forgery. Adrian had more than enough for prosecution. Tasha disappeared. Vanished from social media. Rumors said she left the state. I didn't follow up. I didn't need to. Because justice was already in motion. My divorce lawyer filed under grounds of financial fraud and emotional manipulation. I petitioned to have the marriage annulled and the court agreed. Jeremy walked away with nothing. Not a dime. Not even his dignity. And the inheritance? Safe. Locked down. Legally shielded. For the first time in months I could breathe. But more than that, I could sleep. Because I didn't just survive his betrayal. I ended it on my terms. By the next morning, something inside me had changed. I no longer looked in the mirror and saw the broken woman Jeremy had tried to reduce me to. I didn't see the tear-streaked version of myself who had begged for love, who had accepted lies in place of affection. No, this woman staring back at me now, she was sharp, composed, and most importantly, no longer under his spell. He thought he had played the long game perfectly. He thought I'd break quietly, leave with my pride shattered, and he'd step into my family's inheritance like it was always his to claim. He didn't think I'd fight back. He didn't think I'd outsmart him. But Jeremy underestimated the very woman he married, and that would be his greatest mistake. I started with the will. I requested an emergency meeting with my grandfather's estate attorney and our family's longtime legal advisor. I presented them with everything I'd discovered. Jeremy's infidelity, his manipulation, and most damning of all, his motive, marrying me for money. I laid out every clue, every calculated move he'd made. I could see the color drain from their faces as I laid the truth bare. But there was more. Jeremy had signed the prenuptial agreement without hesitation, confident he could outmaneuver it. But tucked within the legal language, my grandfather, wise and cautious, had included a protection clause. It stated that if the marriage was proven to be entered under false pretenses or fraud, particularly relating to financial gain, then Jeremy would forfeit any claim to the inheritance tied to our union. Worse for him, the clause also allowed for legal action to recoup any damages. That prenup, once mocked by Jeremy, would now be the sword that severed him from everything he schemed to take. I compiled the evidence. Phone records, call logs, screenshots of conversations between him and Eva. The voice recording of him saying, "Once I get her inheritance, we're out of here," was the final nail in his coffin. It played in my ears on repeat, fueling the fire that had once been sorrow but now roared as fury. But I didn't want revenge in silence. I wanted exposure. I wanted the mask he wore to be ripped off in front of everyone who had once trusted him, who had once vouched for him, especially my parents. So I planned a dinner. A formal one. I invited my parents, Jeremy, Eva, and even his cousin Derek, who had stood beside him at our wedding. Everyone who mattered. Everyone who needed to see the truth. That evening, our home, the one I had lived in long before Jeremy ever showed up, was filled with the tension of pretending. My father still carried disappointment in his eyes from when I married Jeremy without his blessing. My mother was quiet, reserved, always the observer. Jeremy played the doting husband with ease, his charm dialed up to full volume. Eva walked in with smug confidence like she owned the place. She had no idea her little world was about to implode. I waited until the meal was nearly over. Then I stood calm and composed and walked to the television in the living room. I cast the audio file to the screen. As Jeremy's voice filled the room, confessing his entire plan to Eva, how he'd marry me, gain my trust, take the inheritance and vanish, the air was sucked out of the room. There was no space for confusion. No ambiguity. The truth was raw, cold, and undeniable. Jeremy's face collapsed into panic. Eva froze, her confident smirk vanishing instantly. My father stood in stunned silence. My mother covered her mouth. Derek looked like he wanted to vanish through the floor. And I remained steady. I explained calmly and methodically how I had filed everything with my lawyer. How the prenup clause would now activate. How Jeremy would not see a single cent of my family's wealth. I'd also filed for annulment on the grounds of fraud. A restraining order was in motion. And if Jeremy contested any of it, I was fully prepared to file criminal charges for attempted inheritance fraud and emotional abuse. He couldn't speak. He could only stare at me like I was a stranger, as if he was only now realizing I had never been the fool he thought I was. Eva rushed out without saying a word. Derek followed her, muttering something about not being involved. Jeremy stood there frozen. I turned to him and told him he had 24 hours to leave my house, and that if he stepped out of line, I would ensure he'd regret it for the rest of his life. There were no raised voices. No screaming. Just a cold, hard end to the fantasy he had built. Afterward, my father looked at me in silence for a long time. Then he simply nodded. I didn't need forgiveness. I didn't need applause. I had reclaimed myself, my dignity, my future. But I wasn't finished. Jeremy had tried to erase me from my own story. Now it was my turn to write the ending, and it wouldn't be kind to him. Jeremy thought he'd buried everything, his tracks, his conscience, his betrayal. But I wasn't done. Not until he lost everything the way he tried to strip it all from me. After the court awarded me full control of my inheritance, and the prenup was ruled invalid due to fraud and malicious intent, Jeremy's true colors bled out for everyone to see. He had no remorse, only rage that I'd beaten him at his own game. But his temper was his undoing. He snapped in public during what was supposed to be a private mediation. Called me every vile name in front of a room of lawyers and my father's old business partners. And just like that, the final nail was in his coffin. Investors in his real estate firm, many of whom were connected to my father, pulled out. His credit dried up. His house of cards collapsed. And when the IRS came calling, I didn't lift a finger to help. I let karma speak. Meanwhile, I began rebuilding my life. I moved into a new home, not the old mansion that had too many ghosts, but something smaller, quieter, truly mine. I started my own charitable foundation in my father's name, focused on helping women recover from financial abuse and betrayal. The irony wasn't lost on me. One day, I received a message from a woman I didn't know. She told me she had almost married Jeremy too. That he'd once charmed her, wooed her with promises and grand gestures. But something felt off, so she backed out. She found me through an article detailing Jeremy's fall from grace and said she was thankful I spoke out. I realized then, I wasn't just fighting for myself. My voice, my story, it had power. Not just to reclaim my life, but to warn and protect others from men like him. As for Jeremy, last I heard he was couch surfing, unable to find stable work due to his reputation. The man who once smugly called another woman his wife, behind my back, was now completely alone. I didn't need revenge that looked like bloodshed. The real revenge was this quiet peace. The sense of freedom, of strength. They say betrayal breaks you, but I've learned something deeper. It reveals who you really are underneath it all. And I didn't break. I rose. And if this story struck a chord with you, don't keep it to yourself. Like, comment and share it. Let someone else know they're not alone. And don't forget to subscribe. New stories drop every single day. You never know whose truth might be next.